Right.
And so what that ultimately illustrated to me is like, hey, my time, energy, and attention is literally running out every single day. And so if I only have limited amounts, that means it's the most valuable thing I have. So how do I make sure that I spend the most valuable thing that I have for however long that I have it on the people and accomplishments that matter the most, on the what I would call the worthy wins?
Hey, friends, and welcome back to this season of The Mary Moran Show. If you are just joining us, this is a season we are lovingly referring to as the underestimated season, after the title of my third book, which just released this year, called Underestimated: The Surprisingly Simple Shift to Quit Playing Small, Name the Fear, and Move Forward Anyway. So, all this season, which we are officially now extending all throughout the rest of 2025, I am being joined by some amazing guests, some all time favorite past guests, and some brand new ones as we sit down and have the deep, hard questions we love to have around here about all the different faces of fear I cover in the book. Things like procrastination, people pleasing, imposter syndrome, self sabotage, second guessing, perfectionism, and more. And today I couldn't be more excited to be joined by a brand new friend. He's the former head of Nike's global marketing division for the Kobe Bryant brand and is now an author, speaker, and executive coach. John Olinger, not sure, as we talk about clarity, consistency, success, and stepping forward into the unknown to pursue what he calls worthy wins. John, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Mary. I'm honored.
Yeah, we have our mutual friend. We have to start by giving a shout out right off the top, Joey Odom, for making the intro. Isn't Joey just the best?
He's incredible. So
Yeah.
grateful. And he, you know it because you've done books. Like you have people who really go above and beyond to help you in those moments. And
Yes.
Joey is one of those people who went above and beyond to really champion me. So shout out, Joey. Appreciate you.
Fun story slash fact. When I was on Joey's show I want to say this was actually for my second book, Slow Growth Equals Strong Roots. He actually did a personalized remake of Country Roads with all the details from my first book, Dirt, I was telling you about, as all the lyrics. And there's just like a video evidence of me freaking out that he wrote this whole song and performed it when we kicked off the show. So I feel like Joey is one of those people who will not get to the end of his life having wanted things that weren't the most important, which is something that's really important to you. And you wrote an entire book about it. Before we even jump into that, one of the things I often do on the show, it usually comes much later in the episode, but for you, it's coming right off the bat, which will soon make sense, is we will often do kind of a very meta, break the fourth wall, Zach Morris worthy TV timeout, where we just pause to really appreciate great writing.
Hmm.
One of the things that I talk about with my writing students, I have a writing course, is this concept of parachuting right into the action, dropping people right down into the scene, and how important first sentences are in a book for our brains wanting to care about the story that's about to unfold. And the very first line in your book is, on October 5th, 2022, I stood naked in front of a full room of my coworkers at Nike. That is a story I want to know more about right off the bat. So maybe just drop us right into that scene as it sets us up for this
Yeah. So
conversation.
first of all, my publisher and I went back and forth on whether or not I was going to use naked in the first sentence of my book or not. Um,
Nice. I'm glad
but
you won.
but ultimately, I felt like it was the best representation of that moment. You know, that
Yeah.
moment, October 5th, 2022, almost 3 years ago. You know, probably by the time this comes out, right about 3 years ago. And
Yeah.
um, you know, at Nike, you don't really get to ever stand up and tell your story, your full
Hmm.
story, to
Yeah.
your coworkers, and all the more so at this point in time. You know, Nike's campus was closed for 2 years,
Wow.
so like we left there on whatever day that was, March 2020, and the campus didn't reopen again until May of 2022. And so, and I was living by that time, foreshadowing, I was living across the country. And so I basically asked my boss when I knew that I was leaving the company, I said, hey, can I own your staff meeting my last week in the office? And he was
Mm.
sort of like, sure. What are you going to talk about?
Yeah.
And I was like, I
Especially
don't
as you're, like, on the way out. What
yeah,
can
yeah,
you
it's not
say?
normal, you know? In a lot of ways, like, my exit of Nike was like somebody retiring, and part of the reason I was given that, opportunity was because of the work I'd done and the person I'd been, and so there was a level of trust that had been built over time to know, like, "Hey, we trust him," and so even they didn't know I was gonna talk about, I was like, "Hey, I'm gonna come share," and in the months leading up to it, I kept noodling, "What am I gonna share? Am I gonna talk about my greatest hits, quote, unquote, the best projects, the best things the best athletes, the things I wanted to learn?" And what I couldn't shake in that period of time, Mary, was that what I really wanted to share was about the hard losses I'd taken on my journey at Nike because I ultimately wanted to help them win. I wanted I want what I longed for and what I've been asking my bosses for even prior to, like, me resigning and all that stuff. I just was like, "I just wanna help people at Nike have more success than I had because I got thrown in the deep end."
Mm,
And so my day, October 5th, 2022, when I stood up in front of him, that was my basically TED Talk to my coworkers
right,
of how do you succeed at Nike while not losing in the places that matter most.
right.
And in order
Oof.
to do that, I had to stand there naked and talk about not literally naked, just to be clear, that's the next line
Right,
in the
that's
book.
the next line.
Uh, but I had to stand up there in front of my coworkers and tell them about my losses
Mm,
as it related to my life outside of work.
yeah,
You know,
that's right.
I'd had plenty of success at Nike at projects, and people would acknowledge, "Hey, you did this thing great," and all these things. But what nobody saw and what nobody sees when you're in that environment is the things that are going on behind the scenes. Unless you have, like, some big crash out that's, your family fully blows up or whatever, like,
Mm,
nobody knows the things that are happening behind the scenes or the ways that you screwed up. And so I felt like the best way to help them was to share about how I'd lost and how I could help them think about how to win.
yeah, I love that, and I think, like, talking about that word "win," gets gosh, we live for nuance here and on this show, and we're gonna have so much of it as we dig through this word "winning," but I think it's important to even set the backdrop at which such a vulnerable conversation, such a vulnerable presentation was taking place because so as we said, you worked at it for a decade in marketing at Nike, 3 of which were, as sort of the head of global marketing for the Kobe Bryant brand, not sort of, were. And this is a brand that is known for winning. This is a brand for
Yeah.
just do it,
Yeah.
keep going, keep pushing, put yourself to your limits. Nike herself, in fact, as you talk about in the book, is the goddess of victory according to Greek mythology. And you go on a little later and you mention the documentary Shoe Dog, which is super on the top of my list to watch, by the way, because I was just at a retreat literally like 2 weeks ago in Alabama. And one of the attendees there was telling me about this film and said, I have to watch it because of what we were talking about. You mentioned Nike co founder Phil Knight drops this truth bomb in that documentary about both himself and the culture of Nike. Whatever happened, I just didn't want to lose. Losing was death. And I just wrote in my notes, "Oof," because I super felt that in my wisdom teeth when I read it because that has been me most of my life,
Mm.
is that I feel like my life is only as good as my latest good thing.
Right.
And so, here's my deep question for you right off the bat that and there are gonna be a lot of these because your book provoked so many of them, so that's a
Mm.
very good reflection on what's so good in all these pages, is talk for a little bit as a leadership coach about the balance of wise discernment and the self-awareness to go, I am going to spend my life, right? So me being afraid of losing kept me only doing the things I was good at. That's the setup to this question. Is that wise discernment and self-awareness of taking my 8s and 9s to a 10? Or what is the balance of that of we stay in our comfort zone as a, cage basically for fear of failing, for fear of not being good right off the bat, for fear of being an amateur, and being really bad at something when you first start. So how do we move forward with wisdom of, hone the things you already have a natural ability for versus not being so afraid of losing, losing equals death that we don't try any things?
Oh, that's a great question. What comes to mind immediately as you say that, and the crux of the book, and really what I'm hoping to encourage people is we can win at almost anything, but we can't win at everything. And so the it's actually up to people to decide what do they want to really win at. And I think when you stop to pause and you say, "Hey, at the end of my life, what do I wanna have succeeded at? What do I wanna have spent my life on?" To me, that's an invitation to stop and ponder that, and if you get really clear about that and you take some time to lean in and say, what is the meaningful story of my life? Like, how was I made? You know, what do I love? What is my, like, intention and purpose, and what's the bigger thing? That creates the opportunity for you to step out of the box, the fear
Mm,
box. But without clarity about what you really wanna be true at the end of your life, it's a lot easier to just stay with the status quo.
yeah.
And whether you know you're in the fear box or you're just going on and trying to survive and do the best you can with your life. Like, most people are in a box, Mary. Like, that's the
Mm.
reality. We're all just living in this space of trying to survive, trying to do well, provide for our families, care for our loved ones. You know, we're all just going. And so, like, the book is actually this invitation to pause, to just pause our lives for a moment. It doesn't have to be a long pause. It doesn't have to be years of pondering. It doesn't have to be a crazy strategy. It just has to be a chance to pause and say, what do I really want to be true at the end? And am I headed in that direction right now?
That's really good. I like this idea, and we're gonna get into this more as we go, of this direction that we're headed. There's an analogy in the book of, like, we all go to the airport, but we're not just picking the 6th plane we see. Like, we gotta know where we're headed. That's an important decision, important, factor in the decisions we're gonna make. The reason that that Shoe Dog documentary came up at the retreat is we were talking about hidden seasons
Mm,
and doing the work with excellence and working on the
mhm,
craft when nobody is seeing it yet, and how do you know when it's time to quit versus how do you know if you just push through
mm.
a little bit longer, then it all would have started to fall into place, and sort of the history of Nike Blue Ribbon
Blue
Athletics,
Ribbon
I think is what it
Sports.
was called.
Yeah, Blue Ribbon
Blue
Sports.
Ribbon Sports. And so just to kind of set up this question, I'm just going to, read some notes that I have here, and then I want you to riff on it for a while. Two of the biggest fears that I talk about in Underestimated that I see in my coaching clients over and over is number one, failure is fatal. If I
Mhm.
fail, it's going to prove all the people right who said I would never amount to anything. And number two, what if all of this is just a waste of time? What if I divert my tea, which we'll get into? I'm not ready for you to talk about tea yet. We're going to talk about that later. If I divert my tea, all my energy and such to this thing and I take it away from my family and the people I love most, and then it's my dream, but it ultimately doesn't work out, then it feels like I've like double lost.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the fear that I see them have. And on the waste of time part, that's where this documentary came up. And I looked up Phil Knight's sort of fail fast philosophy that grew out of the years of struggle. And he said, but my hope was that when I failed, if I failed, I'd fail quickly so I'd have enough time, enough years to implement all the hard won lessons. I wasn't much for setting goals, but this goal kept flashing through my mind every day until it became my internal chant fail fast. And what I think is so interesting about that is the pairing of this fast failing, like get to that part quickly, in order to have so that you have enough time left to actually apply those lessons. I know that urgency is a big repeating pattern in your book as well. And so, in Underestimated, we talk about this feeling of repeating this lesson over and over, only we never seem to learn it.
Yeah.
Why do we kind of keep finding ourselves back at the bottom of the mountain? So, just riff for a little while on this idea of what if it's all a waste of time, but the clock is still ticking anyway, and
Mhm.
that the failure is not fatal. Just anything that came up for you in that whole big convoluted setup.
I think there's 2 things. I go back to my high school journey. So I don't write about it in the book, I don't think. I'm pretty sure I don't. So I was a basketball player trapped in a runner's body. So
Okay.
I loved basketball, but I was built like a runner, a long distance runner.
Mm,
And but part of the reason why I loved basketball, it was a haven for me. My mom had passed away when I was 11, and basketball
mhm.
was like my place that I went and just processed, and it helped me work through that. And so I kept working and working and working, and I got to my junior year of high school, and I was a good player. I was ready to play on the varsity team, and a new coach came in and he basically at the start of my junior year said, "Hey, I need you to play JV as a junior." And for anybody who doesn't know the context of what that is, that's basically like, "Hey, you're not gonna make it, bro.
Wow.
You're a junior." Like there was a sophomore who was gonna play varsity in front of me, all this stuff. And I was at this pivotal point in my life where did I wanna keep trying or did I wanna give up? And the thing I realized at that point in time was if I gave up, if I quit, there was only one outcome. And if I kept persevering for a period of time, then maybe it'd be different. So I decided to play. I played one meaningful game my whole
Yeah.
junior year in varsity, and then I didn't play again after that. There was no reason. And then my senior year, the person who was in front of me, the younger kid, he transferred out. And we walked into the start of my senior year, and the coach said, "Hey, you're the starting point guard on the team. Here's the keys. Good luck. Have
Well,
this." And it that season changed my life. I went on to
hmm.
play basketball in college. I played basketball overseas.
Wow.
Um, a big part of me cracking a door at Nike was because I had this basketball expertise and viewed as that. And
Hmm.
if I would have quit my junior year when everybody around me was like, "Yeah, you should probably quit. Like,
Hmm.
there's no future for you." Like, you basically have to decide, like, are you gonna quit where there's only one outcome, or you're gonna go for the thing you really long for? And for me, I really wanted to keep playing basketball, and so it was worth it. When I think about my kids now, if they were in the same situation as me, I would be so prone to say like, "Hey, let's redirect." But I think what I would sit down with my kids and say if they were, the 16 or 17-year-old version of me, like, "Hey, well, what do you really want to be true at the end of high school?"
Right.
And maybe
Mm.
a pivot makes sense because you're gonna allocate your time, energy, and attention to other things.
Mm.
Or maybe you wanna say, "Hey, I wanna go all in on basketball, and even if I don't make it as a collegiate basketball player, my experience with basketball is gonna allow me to do something in sport, involved in other things." There's always a pivot in there. So,
Yeah.
that story comes to mind as, like, just this reminder about quitting only has one outcome. And then secondly, when I started at Nike, I started at the bottom of the totem pole. So I wrote tweets for Nike basketball. I wrote 10,000 of them.
Whoa.
And I was in that
Wow.
yeah, I was in that role for about 2 years. And the department I sat in was not like super well respected. I felt like I was capable to hang with everybody else, but like they looked down on me. So I could have just accepted that, but I just kept showing up to the meetings that I wasn't invited to, but I thought I could learn from or add value to. I would just sit in the back in
Hmm.
these global brand marketing meetings.
Wow.
And I had some ammo because I was in social, so I would see things people are saying. I would bring up stuff that none of them had time or energy to look at. But I said I would give myself 2 years in that job. And if at the end of 2 years there wasn't anybody looking at me at Nike saying, "Hey, we see you. There's an opportunity," then I would say, "Hey, I'll take my 2 years of experience and go find somewhere else to leverage my experience at Nike." But in the midst of that, I didn't just sit there. So the first year I learned my craft, I learned everything I did, and then the reality was, like, my job wasn't taking my full amount of time. Like,
Mm.
I had flexibility, and so somebody got promoted and there was a gap on one of the teams, and I said, "Hey, can I stretch and do that job?"
Mm.
And they weren't saying, "We'll pay you." I didn't have to do it. I didn't have to do that work. There was nothing promised to me, but basically like, "Hey, I'm gonna go for it." And, I'll say it here, truth be told, my boss did not want me to do it. He couldn't stop me, but he didn't want me to do it. And, it was a time where it was like I had the flexibility to do it. As long as I got my other work done, I did it. So, fast forward to the 2-year mark. I get to the 2-year mark, and it's like there's no other job. And the job that I was doing as a stretch, I thought they were gonna hire me for. And the way headcount works at Nike, they get to the end of the fiscal year and they're like, "All right, here's the headcounts we have. We're gonna fill in these jobs." Get to the end of that year and they're like, "Hey, sorry, there's no headcount for next year for this job." So it's like, "Oh man, what are we gonna do?" And the guy who was like supervising me in that stretch role was like, "Hey, I'm gonna connect you to a couple people." And within 24 hours, I had 3 interviews in 3 different spots across the company lined up. They were all the
Wow.
next week.
Hmm.
And so I interviewed in Portland on Monday. I flew to Chicago on Tuesday, interviewed in Chicago on Wednesday, flew home Wednesday night, interviewed Portland again on Thursday.
Wow.
And ultimately, I got an offer within 3 days from one of those roles. And the reason they gave me the offer was because I was the only candidate in the pool of candidates that had digital marketing experience that was beyond one silo. Like
Hmm.
some people had social, some people had .com, some people had apps. Because of my both my normal job and my stretch job, I had apps, social, and .com.
Wow. I love that. You know what I love about that is that it's like it's what I hear is like 2 things. One, it's like follow the breadcrumbs backwards, and it starts to kind of give you glimpses of where you're headed, even though the breadcrumbs at the time might have made you think it was something totally different. Like, you may have thought you were going to be an NBA star or whatever, college star, maybe you were a college star, but you thought it was gonna be the playing basketball, but that was just the foundation to this whole other Nike, platform phase of your life that then becomes a platform for something else. So follow the breadcrumbs backwards. I
Yep.
was called really good at reading in grade school and thought that was the worst gift you could just about ever hear, and now I do podcasts and audiobooks, so it all makes sense eventually if you add in the variable of time, and then on the flip side of it is being willing to do more than that's being asked of you, and that's very rare these days, and in fact, it's being encouraged to go the other direction, right? Like quiet quitting, just show up and do the bare minimum, whatever. There's a lot of nuance in that conversation, but
Mhm.
it is that, like, just putting yourself in the rooms that you had no business being in simply because you're willing to do it without somebody asking or somebody paying. I think that's really fascinating.
And this is where it's like you can't do everything. So I couldn't show up in every meeting, I couldn't go every place, I had to do my job, but, like, I knew I wanted to try to make it at Nike, and I knew that I wanted to try to make it in a space specifically at Nike that was all about storytelling, and that's what brand marketing is, and so that's where I aligned my energy, my focus was to say, "I'm gonna show up in those meetings because this is where I want to work." Just in the same way, if I had said, "Hey, I wanna pivot and I wanna go work in sports marketing, I wanna work in IT, or I wanna work in human resources," then I should have then gone and tried to build relationships and spend time and show and assert my value in those spaces.
Yeah, love that. Well, talking about the brand side of it and understanding a brand side of it, your work on the Kobe brand in particular, we get into this conversation about Mamba mentality that he
Mhm,
was famous for talking about in his own life and then wanting to pass down. And he famously said that his confidence came from knowing he had done everything he could to prepare. And
mhm,
you say in the book that was Mamba mentality in a nutshell, to become the best versions of ourselves by getting better day after day, right? So putting in the reps, putting in the
yep,
work. And one of the things that I talk about in Underestimated is this idea of building the good kind of calluses that most of the people I talk to think they have to have everything figured out in order to get
mm,
started. But the truth is, you have to start in order to figure things out. And that the good kind of calluses are not the ones that make us callous or numb to the work or the world or the people that it serves, but they're actually enabling us to have enough of a protective outer barrier just simply from putting in the reps that we're able to do the work we are called to better and with
yeah,
more endurance over the long
mhm,
haul. And I say in there that we allow the work to work on us until it changes you right down to your very core, to your very fingerprints, like the calluses that a guitar player gets, until it becomes a very part of your identity. And in my notes, I wrote down a lot of Christians would probably be uncomfortable with a statement like that because we're so used to saying my identity is in Christ. I am a daughter of a king, I'm a son of a king, whatever. And we know that something like putting our identity in our jobs is a very worldly thing that can be taken away. And then who are we if we don't have that job anymore? But what I mean by it more is that when the work works on you and you are doing the good work that was prepared for you in advance, you are becoming closer to the true version God had in mind for you. That's
yeah.
what I mean about it being part of your identity. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that, especially writing a book that says, listen, I thought getting to the top of this ladder or this mountain and this incredible job was going to be it for me, only to realize maybe I was chasing something that didn't ultimately matter over the long haul. So, can our work be part of our identity without it becoming the bad kind of being our identity?
Yeah, I think it can. It sounds like you said, it sounds a little counterintuitive
Yeah.
to, some of the things we're trained on. I think that both can be true, but, like, the reality is God made each of us
Mm.
unique. He gave us, you know, like I said, I was gifted to be a runner, so I didn't embrace that. I didn't embrace that when I was in high school. But like we're all created uniquely and personally to have different gifts and talents and areas of emphasis. And um, like if somebody asked me what's most important to me, I'd say my faith in Jesus is the most important. But ultimately, what does that look like? How do I play that out in the world? How do I serve and love people? And in the day to day, the reality is like if I think about my time at Nike, if you would have asked me in my midst of being at Nike, hey, what's your gift?
Mm.
I would have felt like I had to tell you my gift is marketing.
Mhm. Right.
And the truth is I'm good at marketing. I'm solid. I did a good job. I do well, but it's not my greatest gift. And I spent a lot of time trying to have that be the case. And so part of what I realized it about 6 years into my time at Nike was like what I care about most and what I'm most gifted at is helping people get really clear about what's most important to them and then helping them build strategy, whether that's marketing or business or life, to figure out how to go after that thing they've said is most important. And what I realized was that I was doing all these jobs at Nike where I wasn't attuned to my greatest gift. And it wasn't that I wasn't good, it wasn't that I wasn't bringing God's presence with me or serving people, but I came to this realization of like, man, how God has made me is to say, hey, I really want to serve and pour my life into other people to help them succeed. And so there is identity in that. I don't think that, my identity, it doesn't mean my identity could be a marketer. If God had made me to be the best marketer on the planet, that'd be
Mm.
great. In the midst of that, how do I make sure I don't lose everything else or think that that's what makes my life?
Right. Right. Oh, love that. You mentioned this, like your gift is to help people get clear. And one of the things you say in the book that I think is so incredible is there has to be clarity in order to create consistency. I kind of want to set the stage for that of you're working on this campaign, you're getting to know the athlete and the human that is Kobe Bryant, and then January 26, 2020 happens and your phone starts blowing up. That he and his daughter have been lost in a helicopter accident, and you say that it is now your literal job to not only grieve the loss of a colleague and a friend, but to, as you say in the book, start spinning up a response. And
Mhm.
so will you just kind of talk about that experience of it now being your job to try to put words to someone else's legacy, especially someone like him who was so beloved and well known?
Yeah, it was a challenge in a lot of ways, but I think the beautiful part about Kobe was that you didn't have to guess what he cared about most at that stage of his life.
Mm,
And this is where like the way that we spend our days shows what we care about most.
yeah.
And the way that Kobe spent his days was he was with his family in the morning, he went to his office, he picked his girls up from school every day in the carpool line, and then he went and poured into predominantly female basketball players, helping them become the best version of themselves on the court. And so the challenge at Nike was not that Kobe wasn't clear about what mattered to him. It was how do we get everybody to be clear about what we're trying to accomplish?
Mm, what he was
And
clear about.
yes, and that
Yeah.
it's not about us.
Mm, yeah.
Like it's not about what we want. It's not about this. It's like our opportunity is to lean in and say, what was Kobe living for? What was his legacy that he was trying to pass down? And how do we do that? And so the thing that I took from my time at Nike is everybody was smart. Everybody was able to like think amazingly and bring great ideas. And in that scenario, it's sort of like, well, whose weapon is better? Is it the nunchucks or the ninja stars? Like which,
Yeah.
like which ones are better? And both might work. And so
Mm,
my aim and what I learned through the process was I had to try to create objectivity in areas where there was subjectivity. Because when it's subjective, it's just sort of, well, I like nunchucks and you like ninja stars. And so it's sort of like, well, okay, how are we going to solve this? And so in a case where everybody cares and we're trying to figure out what we do, how do we just make it super objective and clear so that we can all get on the same page to and again, that's where Kobe's life made it clear. If Kobe wasn't clear about what he wanted to accomplish with his legacy after basketball, it would have been harder, but he was living it out day after day after day. And so then it was like, "Hey, team, let's rally around this thing that he clearly felt was so important."
Yeah, I love that so much that, that the way he lived his life, the clarity that he had could then, be translated by you as, sort of the head of this other pyramid of like, here's our, you call it a North Star and a filter in the book that got people on a global team all across the world working together towards this. We all know what plane we're getting on because we all know where we're trying to head.
Yeah.
And in that work, the team is then able to release a short film about his life called Better, reflecting the better everyday mentality of Mamba Mentality, that reaches 1 billion people in the first week alone.
Mhm.
And here's the next question. This is going to be a little bit of a random setup, which I'm sure you're kind of noticing by now tends to happen the way Mary's brain works. My husband Justin and I literally yesterday went to go see a Tuesday morning matinee because
Mm.
that's when the cheap seats are
Yep.
at our local theater of the new The Roses movie.
Mm.
And it's really fantastic, by the way. Incredible storytelling, incredible writing,
Okay.
incredible acting. Super recommend it. It's a remake of the '80s movie with Michael Douglas and Kathleen
Nice.
Turner,
Okay.
whatever. Okay, we're all tracking. Okay, so there's this scene, I don't think this is too much of a spoiler alert, it happens early in the movie, where a storm both devastates the architecture project he was working on, so bad for him, and diverts traffic off the highway to the little restaurant she's just started, including a restaurant critic, and her business starts to blow up.
Mhm.
And so I wrote in my notes, this idea of, like, going back to what we were talking about earlier, working on the craft in the hidden times, the craft versus the traffic. And I've been getting this message a lot over and over, John, of like, our job is to focus on the consistency, focus on putting in the reps, focus on the excellence,
Mhm.
focus on the craft, focus on the who and the why. The reach and the success, the diversion of traffic right into our parking lot, that's up to God.
Yeah.
Right, and we cannot control the how or the where, the when of when that traffic may start piling into our parking lot, right, to
Mm.
continue the metaphor to death.
Yeah.
And so you are someone who I don't know, I'm just really curious your opinion on this or how it happened for you. You got very clear on the destination. You got everybody else to see the clarity as well. You were all consistent across the board on it, and as a result, as a side effect, the traffic showed up. The
Yeah.
billions watched the film, and so I don't know, what wisdom do you have for us? Did that just happen for you, and you were able to notice from that, or were you always going after the goal of the metrics? I know, when you're in charge of marketing at Nike, that's gotta be a factor. So, like, how did you start to sort between the clarity and the why and the who and the how versus the numbers? And what can we take away from that, and when we're in those extended hidden seasons just waiting for the traffic to get diverted?
Yeah. I think it's a great question, and maybe I always operated a little bit that way. Like we talked about the story of basketball and me coming to the place with Nike of saying, "Hey, I'm gonna give it to you." So like there's part of that inherently in me. But if you asked me, 15 years ago when that was happening, would I have been able to explain it like this? No.
Yeah.
But what would happen was at Nike, when you get into these rooms, you would sit around a big table with all these brilliant people and everybody had great ideas. And so um the reality was you could say, "Oh, well, we're gonna do that idea, and it's gonna lead to an outcome, but it's gonna cost all our money." Or we could do this other idea, it's gonna spend all our budget on this. And what I learned both through the just observing my colleagues go through it and my part in going and participating was that, like, if we don't stop and just say, "Okay, well, which of those things matters most in the end?" Then it's easy to just say, "Well, let's go for the thing that's gonna lead to this viral moment." Well, do we need a viral moment? Is
Yeah,
that
right,
really where we're going?
right.
If we spend all our money on that thing, is that gonna be the result? And so I just watched that happen, and I also watched, us go through seasons where we spent tons of money. Like, here's another wild story. So about 5 years into my job, there was a campaign we were about to do, and we were gonna spend a bunch of money to make these videos, And ultimately, it was sort of like, "Well, why are we making them? We need to spend the money. We need to tell the story." And something about it fell through at the last minute and was like, "Hey, well, we have this shoe launch coming up that we have to highlight." And nobody was focusing on exactly what we're gonna do. And so then we just started digging in. Well, what can we do? And we ended up doing this research. We found out that nobody had really ever told the story of the summer that Michael Jordan went to Italy and shattered a backboard during a game,
Mm,
um, a exhibition game there. Like, everybody knew that it existed, but nobody had ever dove in.
interesting.
And so we started doing this research, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh." And the shoe that we were highlighting was called the shattered backboard. So it was meant to highlight the story.
Well,
But so we basically pivoted once that other thing fell through, and we said, "Well, what are we really trying to do? We're gonna go tell this very unique story." And we didn't know exactly what would happen. Um, but we went there, we went to Italy, we found guy who played in the game, we found Michael Jordan's shoes, we did all this stuff, like literally had glass in the bottom of them still from the game.
wow.
Um,
Wow.
and I'm saying it just because, um, that other thing falling through created an opportunity for us to say, "Hey, well, what are we really trying to do? What are we really trying to bring about?" And we didn't do it so that it would go viral or that it would do this thing, but the reality was what we went and created did. It was Nike's best performing video on Instagram that year. It was it got Ad Age's brand video of the year. It was all these things. Um, but we weren't doing it for that.
Hmm. Yeah.
We were doing it because it was the best story to tell to accomplish the thing we were trying to accomplish.
Wow.
And whether it went viral or not, that wouldn't have said that this was success. Obviously, in a marketing Nike world, like, yes, when that happens, do you get lots of accolades? Are your bosses happy? Do they get to, show your video in the big staff meetings with all? Yes, all those things happened. But we just chose to do the right thing to try to accomplish the thing that mattered most in
Yeah.
that season. So
Hmm.
from
Love
that
that.
standpoint, that's super important to just say, what are we really trying to do? And
Yeah.
if I care about that thing the most, am I willing to do it? Even if it's not necessarily gonna for sure lead to the data points that everybody cares about. And it's the same with, referencing the Better video, ended up with 1 billion views in the first week. We had actually started a brief similar prior to Kobe's passing about what we were gonna do because that was actually supposed to be the time Kobe was gonna be inducted into the Hall of Fame. So we had started preparing a year and a half in advance of like, okay, he's gonna have his Hall of Fame moment in August of 2020. And so we're gonna have this story, have this content, all this stuff. And what that ultimately turned into was this brief to say, hey, we've already sort of written this brief. Let's go figure out how do we bring this singular story to life that was all about passing his legacy down. So,
Wow. Wow.
um,
That just gave me chills, and I'm gonna tell you why. Like, this is I've hinted at this a bunch of times. It's gonna become more clear as we continue to talk. I've written many books about it. I've spent a lifetime trying to kind of untangle myself from achieving my way into worth.
mm,
Grew up in a trailer, so I'm just sort of trying to
mhm,
always outrun that story. And stories like that where it's like he doesn't live to see his Hall of Fame moment,
mm,
or like from a biblical standpoint, Moses comes all the way through the wilderness with the people, and then God's like, "Hey,
right,
just kidding, hand it over to Joshua." That stuff really plays with my head.
mm,
And in this same movie, which apparently has had a very huge impact on my life, John, I don't know what to tell you. In The Roses, when the storm wrecks the building that the
yeah,
husband was working on, Theo, played by Benedict Cumberbatch. I hope I'm saying that right. He's saying to his kids, there's going to come a moment where it might all be taken away
mm,
and the work goes on.
yeah,
And that to me, just from what I've read about him through your words of you knowing him, feels very much like that Kobe mentality. It feels very much like your mentality of like the success and the accolades are the side effect of doing the work. But even if that was taken away, the work goes on.
yeah,
And I just think that's I don't know, it's giving me some head to toe chills right now,
mm,
thinking about that, honestly. So kind of building on that, you with Kobe, you mentioned your mom briefly, but I wanna come
yeah,
full circle to that. You lose your mom when you're 11, she passes away of breast cancer. Later in the book, we talk about losing your dad and this very pinnacle moment of a 40-day prayer fast, which will kind of a prayer journey, which we'll get to in a minute. But there's a quote you share from Steve Jobs where he told the graduating class at Stanford, "Remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices in life." Which reminds me a lot of an Oliver Wendell Holmes quote that I can't get out of my head that says, "Most of us will go to our graves with the music still inside us, unplayed."
Mm, mm,
And so, kind of just this idea of like the inevitability of death creates a whole lot of clarity, which leads to that consistency you talked about. But, and here's the setup, here's the twist, here's the kind of flip side of that.
mhm,
I am also recording today with a man named Tony Miltenberger, who's releasing a book called The Wisdom in the Wound. And
mm,
he talks about how some of our wounds can become our biggest wounds, our biggest stumbling blocks, but also our greatest gifts.
yeah,
And so you talk in the book about how losing your mom at 11 taught you early how life was short and it shouldn't be wasted. And I just want you to talk for a second about how that has become both a wound that you operated out of for a while as you were building your career, and then how it has become one of your greatest gifts for really seeing people, and sort of this idea of like you've been a lifetime of being overlooked has turned you into someone who
mm.
sees. So just talk a little bit about that urgency and how that has become a wound and a gift.
Yeah, it, as a, like, a middle school and high school kid, my friends would have said that I was way more serious than them, and that's because I
Mm,
had just had an experience that made me realize life was more serious than they had had, and so it was a wound. And you talk about some of the things you're trying to outrun. I have my own things that I'm trying to outrun from my trauma of losing my mom at that age, and the ways that I um, tried to handle that. And the truth is, I'm still, and even this book, like, I say it like in the intro, but like this book is for me because I'm prone to win in places that won't ultimately matter to me the most at the end of my life. And as an example, in this case, what my mom's passing did was it made me say, well, I want to protect myself from losing other relationships. And so a way that I've operated for a big part of my life is I've tried to be friends with everybody. I've tried to carry every relationship. I've tried to hold the burden of like, I don't want somebody to be able to look at me and say, "Hey, it's your fault that this relationship is faltering." So I've tried to be everything to everybody. And what as I've gotten older and as I process that through therapy and other spots, I come to the place of realizing as much as I try, I can't be everything to everyone, nor would that ultimately solve my thing I'm trying to protect. And so the gift of it for me now is saying like, hey, I think everybody matters. I love people. Like, I love my friends. I feel like I could see a friend from high school tomorrow and I wouldn't be like, oh man, I don't want to talk to them. Be like, no, I want to talk to them and pick up like right where we left off.
mm,
But what I'm realizing, and through the process of writing and the book reminding me, is like, I can't I can't be everything to everybody. And so the gift of realizing I'm running out of time, that my mom's death first instilled in me, and then my dad's death ultimately reminded me, is like, I have to make choices. I have to
mm.
make choices about what's most important, who's most important, because and that's all based upon me looking at the end of my life and saying, hey, if I only have so much time, energy, and attention, then I want to make sure I spend it on the relationships that matter most, rather than me trying to cover over this wound from so long ago by trying to be friends with everybody.
Yeah. Wow. Something that I've really picked up on, this is not in my notes at all. This is super off the cuff, and I love these moments. Something I've picked up on in what you've said a few different times in a few different ways. So, with the basketball team in high school, you said I had this one incredible game, and that was enough. And then, you talk about there's a part in the book that I had later in my notes about you have this incredible campaign with these shoes that lace up themselves based on Back to
Yep.
the Future, which I
Yep.
totally geeked
Yep.
out on because we are literally having a backyard neighborhood movie this in our backyard this Friday with Back to the Future in it.
Love it.
And you said you just had this huge campaign, and then a boss says, "Okay, well, what do you want to do next? What's next? What's next? What's next?" And you don't know this about me, John, but I am literally somebody who had a coast to coast speaking tour called the What's Next tour with, like,
Mm,
those words on the side of a bus along with my face, like, "What's next?" Like, I love what's
love
next
it.
because 'cause I'm
Yeah.
always running from things,
Mhm.
right? And so you have said a few different ways and a few different times, like, "Oh, the Mamba campaign was, like, the height. I was ready to walk away from Nike if that's where I was being called." Sounds like you've always been that way, and I think that's a very profound, wise, healed, evolved way of being where it's like knowing what's enough. Does it feel that way to you, or does it feel like there's also some, like, wounding in there of don't do too much or don't, don't there's a saying in, Amsterdam actually that's like, "Just ask for the minimum, and that's already too much,"
Mm.
basically, like, is there any element of that, or is it just truly like a, "No, I feel satisfied, I'm good," because 'cause I'm like, "If you have that, bottle it up and sell it, because I mean, I'm ready," you know?
No, I think, uh, it's two things come to mind as you ask that question. So one is, I am prone to not ask for enough.
Mm,
I'm prone to not dream enough. I think and it's this tension because my mom died, I know that life doesn't go that you don't get everything you want. And so I know that, like, not every story ends with the knight in shining armor, getting the girl, quote unquote. Um, not every story ends. Not my story. Like my story pivot. I had these tipping point moments in basketball. Like I could have easily not had made it through basketball and had those experiences. I could have easily not gotten those things. So like, um, it's funny. I told my wife a couple days ago. There's this song, ironically from Morgan Wallen right now. It's called the Dealer,
mm,
and he basically goes on in the song and talks about how a lot of times he's been up against the wall and you know prone to give up, and then sometimes he draws an ace. But what it's taught him is that it's not about focusing on the cards. It's about looking at the dealer, and this is his
mm.
metaphor for God.
Wow.
And so when I think about my life now, am I prone to dream too small? Yes, but I'm also now trying to say, all right, God, like who have you made me to be? How could I step out and say, what is the thing you want me to lean into? And so that's the second point that I wanted
Mm,
to
it's good.
point out to you is like the thing that brings me to those places. All the things you mentioned when I first started Nike, when I was about to leave Nike, questions create clarity.
Yeah.
Questions create clarity. Because for me, I'm I'm going. If I'm on a path, like I'm going, and I'm going to keep going, and I'm prone to just persevere through it, to just keep going and believing it's going to work out. But questions, and again, what the book does and what it's trying to do is just creating questions for us to take a moment and say, okay, do you want to keep going with the blinders on going forward, or is this a good time to pause? And so my wife's question to me about, have you thought about moving east?
Mm.
That was a
Which
pause
for
for
our
me to,
listeners would be giving up the job at Nike
yeah,
in the
ultimately,
shortest version, yeah.
yeah, ultimately it would be saying, are you willing to walk away from Nike? Um, at that point in time would allow me to just say, I am.
Mm,
Well, let's pray about it. Let's pray and invite God into this,
yeah.
and then we'll see what happens. But same thing when was about to get in at Nike. I had a job offer to be the executive director of the United Way in the
Mm,
in the town I was living, and it was a good job. Um, but I've been trying to get in at Nike for over a year, and was knocking on doors, and the United Way said, "Hey," and I was in my like mid-20s, and so they're like, "Hey, if you're going to take this job, you got to stay for 5 years."
wow.
And so then it was a question of, okay, I'm open to that, but like, is that what I really want? And then Nike came in and it was like, well, you can be the bottom of the totem pole, writing all my tweets. And so I sat with a group of friends. They
10,000
call
tweets, I'm still stuck on that.
10,000 tweets. Yes.
10,000 tweets, woof.
Um, but a group of my friends said, hey, we want to get you together and we want to do something we're calling a clearness committee. And the
Mm,
basically, it was me sitting in the center of a circle with 8 of my friends asking me questions.
wow.
And
It's good
ultimately
friends.
yeah, and ultimately what they were asking me was like, "What do you really wanna be true?
Mm,
What do you really wanna be true in the end?" And I'm such a fan of questions, like, I can't tell you or anybody else exactly how they should live their life, but I feel like what God has gifted me with is an ability and a desire and a passion
mm.
to ask questions, to get people to ponder what they really wanna be true.
And that actually I love that because it perfectly sets up the next question, which is just to set it up for our listeners at home, there was this 40-day prayer journey that kicked off when John was trying to decide whether to keep working at Nike, where it was happening during COVID, so working remotely, or to move east to be closer to his wife Erin's family. And that had been sort of a question that had been like loosely in the edges for years, but now it's actually jumped very much to the forefront as this sort of clarity came. And during that same, prayer journey, and I'll have you talk about this more, John, but there was also you'd wanted to maybe you were torn to maybe stay on the West Coast to be close to your dad. Some things happened with him you didn't see coming. And so just talk about how that experience, pulling everything we've been talking about of how much our limited time brings clarity and how clarity points us into our next right action and consistency. Talk now about the concept of tea
Mm.
that was really born through clarity out of that experience of a 40-day prayer journey that actually flipped your whole existence on its head.
Yes, it did. Yeah, and that's where the questions part come in, this I didn't plan to do a 40-day prayer journey. That was my wife being awesome and asking good questions and
Nice.
ultimately us looking at our life and saying, "We don't know what's best. So let's invite God into it." So we start praying. We say we're going to pray for 40 days and 5 days in, my dad has this freak accident and ends up with a traumatic brain injury and it's like, "Whoa, all right, God, that's not really how we saw this going. So what do we do?" And so we kept praying, got to 40 days. On day 40, Nike says, "Hey, you have a job," which is great. But it wasn't the job that I wanted. And so I think what ultimately happened at the end of that, just to close that loop before I answer the question about tea, is like when I when I accepted the job I took at Nike, I got off the Zoom call. My wife and I talked, Erin and I talked that night, and she was like, "What do you think God said in these 40 days?" And I said, "Man, I think He said you can choose. I trust you."
Yeah. I
And
have that in my notes. I just have to pause you for a second. That's a whole question in and of itself, but let's talk about it right now
okay,
because that's a wildly profound thing to say because most of the time the conversations Christians have is about us
mm,
trusting God and us waiting for a directive from him on which one we should choose and which way we should
yeah,
go. And I actually think that there's something really wise and deep in that centers around this idea of free will,
hmm,
that it's not always about, God sort of like turning our shoulders on each turn of the path. It's about him sitting there with like, I picture him with like his chin on his hand being like, which way are you gonna go? I'll be
hmm,
with you on either one, like you talk about in the book. So I wanted to like highlight, I think that's a really profound way of thinking about that. It's certainly not always the case. I know I haven't always been trustworthy to make the decision. But when we are walking with God and we're abiding in God, there does, I think, come a point where God's like, hey, let's
yeah,
choose your own adventure and let's go together.
yeah. And there's just trade offs with different choices, right? And
Yeah.
um, we basically settled out that day and said, "Hey, we are um, not sure what's going to happen with my dad, so we're going to wait, but ultimately we'll make a choice." And if we choose to leave Oregon, we're going to leave some great things behind. And if we choose to go to Florida or to not go to Florida, then we're going to, miss out on some things. And, my dad's passing 2 weeks, 20 days later after that 40 days ended, it sort of just for me created clarity in the sense of like, let's go be near my wife's family. And she was a great trooper. That wasn't part of the plan to ever go back to Florida or anything like that. And so we just leaned in and said, "All right, let's go do that." And there's trade-offs. There's
Yeah.
trade-offs to those
And
choices,
that
but
brings you really to this framework of tea, right?
yeah,
So let's
yeah, it
dig into
does.
that.
It does, and what I realized in my dad's passing was I might be halfway done with my life. I was 37, he was 74, and, so, man, time-wise, I might be halfway done, but literally um it was like a Sunday morning, 5:30 AM. I was working on the book, and I don't normally write at that time of day or on Sunday mornings at that time. I just, like, was prompted, was up. I just felt like God gave me this, like, download of this idea of T, and T basically stands for time, energy, and attention. And the
Mm,
reason why that's so important is because time is the thing that I knew I was running out of, and it's the thing that everybody says is the most valuable. But as I sat there that morning, I realized, well, actually, our energy and our attention are more limited than our time
mm,
because we might have 24 hours in a day, but we don't have 24 hours of energy, physical energy, and we don't have
right,
24 hours of mental attention.
right.
And so what that ultimately illustrated to me is like, hey, my my time, energy, and attention is literally running out every single day. And so if I only have limited amounts, that means it's the most valuable thing I have.
Mm,
So how do I make sure that I spend the most valuable thing that I have for however long that I have it on the people and accomplishments that matter the most, on the what I would call the worthy wins?
mm. Building right off of that, let's kind of wrap this up for the person who's been listening the whole time. They've been sort of like asking themselves some hard questions as we've been going back and forth about what really matters and what are the worthy wins in their lives, what they do need more clarity on in order to stay consistent. What do you say to the person listening who is so focused on just surviving right
Mm,
now? Everything feels on fire, everything feels urgent and devastating and impossible that they can't even think about what's next. They're so, blinders on, tunnel vision, zeroed in on what's now that they can't even they're like, I don't even have the bandwidth. I don't have any of the T, the time, energy, or attention to think about what's next. Speak to that person about, we all have a lot of empathy and an understanding
yeah.
for that feeling. And also, the clock is still ticking. And there is this urgency that we need to really feel in this moment.
Yeah. So worthy wins are about simplicity.
Mm,
And for the person, if they're specifically in that scenario where they just are, their life is on fire and they're just doing everything they can to keep going, then it's all about making one simple choice. And
mm,
we'll just start with one, saying, hey, what is one relationship that will matter to you at the end of your life? And that might be your relationship with God. That might be a relationship with a spouse. It might be a child. It might be a parent. Might be a friend. Pick
mm,
pick one
yeah.
of those people just to start with. I mean, we could do a whole list and say, hey, pick five, but like for the sake of simplicity, pick one. And then think about what is one simple, consistent action that you could take daily or weekly that would be an investment into that relationship.
Mm,
Because our world tells us that, you know, we're validated by what we accomplish,
mm, yeah.
but worthy wins are a combination of the relationships and the accomplishments that matter most. And the risk that we all have is that at the end of our lives, we would have so invested, over invested in accomplishments that we missed out on relationships. And we
Mhm,
see through scripture, we see it through experience, and we see it through evidence based research, right? That the people who are most fulfilled are the people that have the best relationships.
hmm,
And so if somebody's life is on fire right now, as much as you would love somebody to come in and say, hey, what can they do for you? The question would be, what's one relationship you care about the most? And what's one simple, consistent action you can take that would help to cultivate that relationship to greater fruit?
mm. Love that, love that. Well, John, I could hang out with you all afternoon, but I know you got stuff to do and books to launch and all of it, so, let them know where they can find you. Thank you for being here, for giving so much, so generously of your time. Where can they find you, the book, any other things you want them to know about that you have going on? Just tell them all the things.
Awesome. Thanks, Mary. Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at John Olinger, LinkedIn, I'm on there, and then at johnolinger.com. It's JOHN -OLINGER.com.
Love it. All right, friends, the book is Worthy Wins, Pointing Your Life Toward What Matters Most. It is out now everywhere books are sold. Get this in your hands or the hands of a friend who really needs it. And for now, I want to leave you with these words from John. But there was a third element to Kobe's greatness formula, in addition to better everyday and urgency. And I would call this the secret part of the formula. Kobe always said that he was chasing perfection. This was his mountaintop, his target, so to speak. But Kobe was fully aware that he wasn't going to reach that mountaintop in one day, or 1 week, or 1 month, or 1 year. He knew that this was a lifelong journey. Even if he also knew that he'd never actually reach perfection, he knew that the only way to get close and become the best version of himself was to go after it and get better today, and then repeat that day after day after day. Kobe was incredibly wise in this way, and this demonstrated the secret element of his approach to greatness, the element no one ever associated with him because his consistency, better every day, and his urgency were so outspoken. Patience. For Kobe, it was going on the journey every single day with both urgency and consistency, while also understanding that moving toward his destination was a process. Urgency, consistency, patience. He worked hard, but his focus was always on the journey. Until next time, friends, this is the Mary Moran Show, and welcome to your underestimated season.